Greetings, everyone, and welcome. My name is Father Joe Mattern. I'm the founder and director of the Casa, Esther Catholic Worker House here in Omro, Wisconsin. And we want to thank you for joining us for this Lenten series of roundtable discussions. The name of this series is Blessed Are the Peacemakers, a Lenten exploration of gospel nonviolence and why it matters. We are grateful that you have joined us, and we thank you as well as thanking our co-sponsors who have made this possible. Have a good Lent as we send you our blessings.
Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you here for our Lenten exploration of nonviolence. My name is Hannah Eby, and I'm joining you all from Dubuque, Iowa, where I coordinate the Peace and Justice Center at Loras College. Loras is a diocesan Catholic liberal arts college, and we've been thrilled to be part of the planning committee for this series, along with Casa Esther, Catholic Worker, and a couple other campus ministries. We are right in the middle of the 7-week series called Blessed Are the Peacemakers. And I look forward to this ongoing communal reflection on how to be actively nonviolent at this critical time in our world. It's my honor to introduce our remarkable speaker on nonviolent action, engaging faith and social enterprise, Dr. Kit Evans-Ford. It struck me that Dr. Kit truly embodies the title of her talk today. She is a chaplain, author, professor, mother, spiritual director, and social entrepreneur. She's been a nonviolence trainer and activist for over 15 years, focusing especially on education and assisting people in healing from abuse and violence. She's very well traveled and has studied and worked in England, Japan, South Africa, Tanzania, and Kenya, among other countries. I think she has an upcoming trip to Nigeria in July. She now resides in Davenport, Iowa, so not too far from me, where she's an adjunct professor in the Department of Theology and Women and Gender Studies at St. Ambrose University. Her 2 books are called 101 Testimonies of Hope and a children's book on Bishop Richard Allen, A Nonviolent Journey. Dr. Kit is founder of Argrow's House of Healing and Hope, which is a safe space for women healing from abuse that offers free services and provides a living wage for women to craft artisan bath products. She also founded a company called Autistic and Loved, which provides affirming gifts for autistic children and families. Dr. Kit is a recipient of several degrees and awards, including the Jefferson Award and the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Award for public service benefiting local communities. Again, we are so grateful that she is willing to speak with us today. And during her talk, I encourage everyone to submit questions using the chat so that we can then discuss those during the Q&A. And I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Kit.
Hey, wonderful. Good evening, everyone. It is so good to be here with you all this evening. I know there have been some amazing trainings and talks over the last few weeks, so I am honored to be here with you today. So I always start out our Pace. So I work for an organization called Pace Bene and have been a nonviolence trainer with Pace Bene for many years now. And we always, Pace Bene means peace and all good in Italian. And so every time I start a training, we work to get peace and all good energy in the space. And so even virtually. So I'm gonna just say 3 times, and if you're willing and able, no pressure, if you would say it at home with me as loud as you can, okay? 1, 2, 3, Pace Bene, Pace Bene, Pace Bene, peace and all good, right? Because nonviolence, active nonviolence is all about peace and all good energy as well. So thank you so much for participating. All right, so today we're going to be talking about a few things. We'll talk about Satyagraha, soul force, and what Gandhi meant by that. We'll also talk about 2 hands of nonviolence and how people, what are the scripts that people resort to when it comes to wrestling with conflict, and what's an alternative to those scripts. active nonviolence and what that looks like with two hands. And then we'll talk about social enterprise, how active nonviolence looks different for everyone. And specifically for me, much of my call has been focused on combining my faith and my work as a chaplain in the work of social enterprise, which combines using business to do good in the world. Okay, and so we will start off with Satyagraha. And so I have a colleague, really, really special colleague named Veronica Pilarik. Veronica is one of the most compassionate people that I've ever met. She is the one who always kept us centered in our nonviolent direct action work and our nonviolence training work, always was centering us in meditation in so many different ways. And unfortunately, Veronica passed away just a few weeks ago. And so in honor of her, I wanted to share some of her teachings on Satyagraha. And so she uses this quote about Satyagraha, soul force, which is at the soul of active nonviolence. And Satyagraha is something that Gandhi embraced. And so Batshan Khan, in his book, The Frontier Gandhi, says this about Satyagraha, soul force. It says, Satyagraha has a double meaning. It signifies a determined holding onto, a grappling with truth, while at the same time, it implies the force that arises from that grappling, what Gandhi called soul force. It stands for both the means and the ends, the struggle of what is happening and the force that is generated in that struggle connected to violence, connected to war and all these different things. As heat is generated by friction, Gandhi contended power is released from writhing the depths of the human spirit in a struggle toward truth. All right, so I'm going to share just a little, a short reflection by my dear friend Veronica as she explains soul force.
Welcome to the Soul of Nonviolence podcast with Pace Bene nonviolence educator, trainer, and author Veronica Pellicard. Each week, Veronica shares a short reflection based on one of the daily nonviolence quotes Pace Bene sends out to help each of us live the nonviolent life. Be sure to sign up for those emails at pacebene.org. Thanks for listening. Now here's Veronica.
Hello friends. Here we are again to comment on a quote and also to share some time together. We will begin with centering. So you can close your eyes. You can breathe 3 times, making the exhalation a bit longer than the inhalation. And feel very grounded on the floor, feeling the soles of your feet. So this quote is from Batshan Khan, the Frontier Gandhi, a Pashtun who few people know, but did a lot of work in the Gandhian tradition. Satyagraha has a double meaning. It signifies a determined holding on to, a grappling with truth, but at the same time, it implies the force that arises from that grappling, what Gandhi called soul force. It stands for both the means and the end, the struggle and the force that is generated in the struggle. As heat is generated by friction, Gandhi contended, power is released from writhing the depth of the human spirit in its struggle towards truth. It's a beautiful description, actually, of Satyagraha or soul force. You know, if you want to get a spark from 2 rocks, you have to rub them together. And in that rubbing together of the 2 stones, a spark will come. And this is the way that I think this is what happens when we are determined to hold on to grapple with the truth, even in the face of the greatest odds. Something in us, that inner strength that in the usual day-to-day and in the kind of like hypnotic trance most of us are on, we don't get to do that grappling. But then, and this is very much akin to waking up, but then when we have something to fight for, when we see that something needs to change, that something is kind of blocking our integrity, or something is obstructing our aliveness, then we struggle. And in that struggle, as Badshah Khan says, we awaken that force which is inherent to all human beings, I believe, and that is both the means and the ends. And he actually mentions here, as heat is generated by friction, that idea of the two stones, a power that is deep inside of us, that is at the core of our being, becomes very alive and therefore brightens our lives with that aliveness. It becomes the motor, which is the means, and it clarifies for us the goal to which we are striving. And the goal becomes very clear. And in that clarity, we foster openness. And in that openness, we foster sensitivity. And those three together, sensitivity, openness, and clarity, help us to move on and see the next point on the road, and the next point on the road, and the next point on the road. Because we are standing on a platform that is propulsing us almost of its own accord. So the double meaning is that we hold on to, in the sense of we don't let it go, because we are more and more open to it. And then there's the grappling, the two stones rubbing together to create the spark. That is the double meaning of the soul force coming to the fore and waking up from our stupor, our what I call, the hypnotic trance that most of us live in. And then our life has achieved a new depth of meaning. So for this week, I really invite us all to rub the two stones together and see what alights from that effort and where it needs to be applied. So thank you so much for sharing this moment with us, with Pace Bene, and for making our mission the Satyagraha for these times.
Okay, so this satyagraha, this soul force that Veronica so eloquently shares and talks about, taking these two stones connected to the friction, right? When we see injustice, maybe we've experienced it personally, maybe we've seen something in our communities, maybe something has sparked this igniting, this awakening for you to want to do something and be a part of the change. This soul force, this kind of friction that continues to keep us encouraged and inspired to move forward in doing this work. And so with Pace Bene and Campaign Nonviolence, so Pace Bene, so years ago, this was 2013, so almost 10 years ago, we started an initiative called Campaign Nonviolence, where we connected the dots. The thing about oftentimes these issues, these injustices, that ignite us to awaken are so deeply and interconnected. So poverty, racial injustice, and racial justice, environmental healing that's needed. All of these issues are interconnected. And so we started an effort where we organize nonviolent actions around the world connected to taking action, soul force in action. And so soul force for you, and that's one of the questions that we'll have at the end. So what is soul force? What is awakening in you? What has awoken? And what does that look like? What causes that? And what does that look like in your everyday life? For me, soul force in action and nonviolence is connected to social enterprise and working with trauma survivors, right? But for everyone, it's different. But all of these issues are interconnected: poverty, economic equality and inequality, racial justice, environmental healing. And for us, we show and stand up soul force in action through marches, rallies, other public witnesses, mobilizing for nonviolent change. Right. So one of the things that we often talk about in active nonviolence, and also in regards to how we respond to conflict in our personal lives. I'm going to stop this so you all can see me. Okay, so hi everybody. Hi. All right, so soul force. One thing that dear Veronica, my dear colleague, always shared, and so many of us when we're moving forward, as it relates to nonviolent action, is having that center to know why we're doing what we're doing, to be able to be centered in our efforts, and also to stay healthy in our efforts and not burn out. And I think that soul force continues to help us stay strong and keep perspective as we journey in nonviolent action in our everyday lives. Now, one thing that we talk about in active nonviolence is two hands of nonviolence and active nonviolence, but also how we respond to conflict and violence in our own personal lives, right? Oftentimes what we do in our personal lives is also a reflection of what we do in our public lives. And so oftentimes in our trainings, we do a two hands of nonviolence exercise. So I wanted to do it with you, okay? All right, so I'm not able to see everyone, but if you're willing and able, let's do a exercise together, okay? Can I get a thumbs up? If you're willing and able, thumbs up, thumbs up. And if you wanna share your video, all good. If not, all good. All right, I see people, I see people raising their hand virtually. Okay, so if you wanna share your screen, awesome, please do. I'm gonna do gallery so I can see you all, okay? All right, so when we're thinking about conflict and also violence, right? There are three different scripts that we talk about in regards to violence. And many of you may have known these scripts or have heard of these scripts. You know, sometimes, so when I'm teaching with Dr. Ken Buddigan, oftentimes he refers to Howard Thurman's work and speaking about people having their backs against the wall and having to resort to certain ways of accommodating or avoiding violence in their communities. But oftentimes we also embrace these responses in our personal lives and in our communal lives. So, okay, so these strategies and what people do sometimes. So how do we respond to conflict and violence in our community sometimes? So the first is avoidance. So if you're willing and able, avoidance. We're putting our head down, arms up if you're willing and able. Oh, I don't see what's happening. If I just turn my head or put up a blind eye, I won't see. It's going to go away, right? So we're avoiding what's happening, putting our head down. Okay, you can move your hands back regular. Okay, so avoidance is one of the scripts that sometimes we do in our personal lives, right? We have a conflict with someone, oh, I'm just going to ignore them, right? But if they're in your life and you have relationships, right, avoiding it isn't going to make the problem go away. And that's similar in our communities. If we avoid the violence, if we avoid what's happening as it relates to the environment, if we're avoiding racism and classism, all these different things, right, the issues don't go away. Right. The next script is accommodation, right? So we're going to put our hands out as if we're holding a plate, right? So we are accommodating. We're like, okay, you know, this is just the way it's always been, right? If we just I mean, it's just the way it's been. So we're just going to keep it that way. We can't do anything about it. We can't do anything about these issues in our community or the world. So we're just going to accommodate it. That's just the way things are. Okay. So, but think about accommodating. If you had to hold your hands up, this way, if you had to carry this weight for an extended amount of time, think about how heavy that weight of injustice and racism and poverty and environmental degradation, all of that weight on our shoulders, in our hands, right? What that would do to us as individuals, but also what that does to our communities, right? It's a heavy weight. Okay. The next script that is often connected to how people, our communities, maybe even ourselves, respond to violence, right? So, okay, make sure there's no one around you because I don't want you to hurt anybody. All right, so this is counter violence. We're gonna push forward as hard as you can, push forward, okay? We're pushing, you're saying an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If you come at me, I'm gonna come for you, all right? Pushing forward, okay? So those three scripts: avoidance, accommodation, counter violence, right? All right, so I want you to take your hands where you were with pushing forward and what we do with active nonviolence. Okay, so maybe before we go there, some people are responding. Noel put, I avoid. Okay, so if you're willing and able, no pressure. We're usually able to have conversations and interact with each other. So if you want to put in the chat or maybe just think about, let's just take a minute. Do you embrace any of the scripts? Avoidance, no judgment here. Accommodate, do you accommodate when there's a conflict? Do you embrace counter violence? Are any of those your scripts? Okay, you can put in the chat or you can just think about it. Okay, someone says 1 and 2. Okay, it's helpful to be mindful of these things as well in our personal lives, but also in our community, because if we're mindful of them, then we can work to shift if needed. Okay, so let's go back to the counter violence. And what we're going to do is we are going to embrace and work to understand what we are learning and what we're working to embrace on the nonviolent journey. Okay, so we're going to push that one hand forward, right? But we're going to bring and cup this other hand. So we're going to push forward and we're going to push back. This is active nonviolence. Standing firm against injustice, right? If there's something bad happening in your community, if you are being mistreated, if there is something connected to someone feeling of being pushed to do something they don't want to do, we are standing against injustice and we are speaking truth, right? But we're also extending compassion to the humanity of the other person, right? So it's a back and forth, 2 hands of nonviolence, standing firm against injustice, but extending compassion to humanity of the person or the community or the organization that we are working to stand firm against, okay? And so this comes from this is 2 hands of nonviolence, comes from Barbara Deming, who was a late feminist writer and an activist. And so what she said is, with one hand, we say to the one who is angry or to an oppressor or to an unjust system, stop what you are doing. I refuse to honor the role you are choosing to play. I refuse to obey you. I refuse to cooperate with your demands. I refuse to build the walls and the bombs. I refuse to pay for the guns. With this hand, I will even interfere with the wrong you are doing. Okay? But extending that compassion, she's also saying, but then the advocate of nonviolence raises the other hand. It is raised outstretched. Maybe with love and sympathy, maybe not, but always outstretched. With this hand, we say, I won't let go of you or cast you out of the human race. I have faith that you can make a better choice than you are making now. And I'll be here when you are ready. Like it or not, we are part of one another. So Barbara Deming's 2 hands of nonviolence, standing firm against injustice, but extending compassion to the humanity of the other. Okay. And so in my journey My journey has been quite interesting. I've been a nonviolence trainer with Pache Bene for about 12 years now, have worked very actively with organizing thousands of actions around the world with Pache Bene and Campaign Nonviolence. But oftentimes I find that the the causes, that friction in satyagraha that really sparks our heart, really sparks our spirit, and you feel a fire towards. Oftentimes, I find that those issues oftentimes are something that we've seen that have impacted us personally. It may have impacted someone that you love deeply, someone that you've interacted with, a place that you've gone, and something kind of switched for you and said, okay, this is a cause that I have to fight and commit to. And so for me, my cause is connected to violence against women. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, I think this is it. Okay, so for me, all right, so these are my people, right? So my cause and what I have committed my life to, my soul force, my satyagraha, is connected to the women in my family. You can see here, that's my mom on the left, my grandma Argrow in the middle, that's me on the right. And I didn't know my little tiny girl Imani is right there underneath the picture as well. But these are the women. I grew up in a small town in Mebane, North Carolina, had a family of really strong, encouraging women. But my grandmother married at the age of 14, and my grandfather was a bit older than her. He was 28 years old, had some issues with alcoholism. And so abuse was very prevalent. And so growing up, I saw abuse with my grandmother and other women in my family. And so for me at a young age, working with trauma survivors and also committing to active nonviolence was very important to me. Okay. Eventually, what do young people do when they want to change the world? You go to the Peace Corps. So after college, I went and I was a teacher in Washington, D.C. with Teach for America. And then I went to the Peace Corps. So these are some of my girls that I taught on the island nation of St. Kitts and Nevis years ago. And so many of them are grown now with their own families. But this experience was dear to me. I was able to do a lot of work connected to girls and empowerment, work with their government to get women involved in politics and other things. Had already worked with women healing from violence. And unfortunately, during my time as a Peace Corps volunteer, I also became a survivor of an extremely violent crime, a sexual assault. And so this work became, was already part of something I was passionate about in my family, but it also became very important for me to just see what would help me in my own healing from trauma, but what would also help other women. Okay. So this became part of my ministry. Right. I work to understand the deep root of trauma connected to women survivors, and this isn't just women survivors of violence. Oftentimes when people are traumatized from an issue or an injustice, be it war, be it poverty, be it classism, racism, there's often trauma that we need to be mindful of when we're working to be in solidarity with the people that we serve. I always say there's a difference between charity and solidarity, right? Charity is important. Charity is connected to love, connected to giving resources, donating our time, donating our money. These things are donating food. Charity is very important. But I also find that solidarity is also important, right? For me, solidarity looks like being hand in hand with someone and walking with them, journeying with them every step of the way, right? We may not always be there with the person, but you're treating them as if you're equal. You are joining hand in hand in solidarity with them, not taking 10 steps ahead of them and looking back or looking down. You're walking hand in hand in solidarity, seeing how you can be present with each other and sharing what resources you have, moving forward in solidarity. Okay, so for me, it was important for me to research what helped women survivors to be present in solidarity, but also to be able to help provide the best possible quality care, right? And so I think this applies not just for, again, women survivors of violence, but people who have survived trauma. So Judith Herman is a professor at Harvard, and she wrote a book called Trauma and Recovery: The Aftermath of Violence from Domestic Abuse to Political Terror. And she talks about how there are 3 stages of recovery when we are working or being in solidarity with people who have survived really extreme trauma. So she talks about how important the establishment of safety is. She talks about making sure that people have safe places and comfortable spaces to literally be able to lay their head, right? She talks about too remembrance and mourning. Oftentimes when people have experienced, poverty, racism, classism, sexism, all of these different things, violence, right? They suffer in silence. They may not have a safe space or someone that they feel comfortable speaking to, but it's so important to be able to, for communities to be able to remember and mourn what they have lost, right? So that they can move forward in their healing journey. Also 3, reconnecting with ordinary life, being able to tap back into those things that give them great joy, right? Be it job security, be it having a safe place to be able to laugh uncontrollably with their family, to be able to do those hobbies that they once did before traumatic events happened in their community, right? So when we look at models of restorative justice and healing circles and communities, and all of these different models of healing in communities, they're so important and so necessary as we work to be in solidarity with those who are oppressed, and as we work to journey in solidarity hand in hand with those that we love. Okay. So in 2017, I see their students here. So when you have assignments, students, think about those things, no pressure, but think about those things that you really desire to do. When you have those senior papers or those senior projects, write down those things and research those things that you ultimately dream of. My senior year at the Pacific, or my 3rd year of my Master of Divinity degree at the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, my senior paper was focused on this Women's Center for Healing and Hope, where I would live in a community for 5 years and create free holistic programming for women who had been abused. And I would develop relationships with service providers to be able to provide those services for free. And so I moved to Davenport, Iowa, and unconsciously I started to move forward with my plan. Write it down, write your vision down and make it plain, even if it's a senior paper in your undergraduate experience. So it was definitely important for me to do that and help me move forward. So in December 2017, I started Argrow's House of Healing and Hope in Davenport, Iowa. Right, the church support, the community was very instrumental in helping me move things forward with Argrow's House. Right, and one of the missing links for me was social enterprise. So I knew that when women survivors of trauma are fleeing abuse, specifically in domestic violence relationships, oftentimes financial power over keeps them in that relationship. And so I wanted to be able to provide jobs for the women that I was serving, or we were serving. And so I had no idea how to make bath and body products. I was a full-time theology and women's studies professor. And so I knew that social enterprise was possible because of my now mentor, Reverend Becca Stevens from Thistle Farms in Nashville, Tennessee. They've been in existence for 25 years, have a 2-year residential facility called the Magdalene House, and they have a multi-million-dollar bath and body social enterprise where all of their employees are women survivors of violence. They make different products from us. They don't make soap and bath bombs. But I knew that it was possible, and Becca is an Episcopal priest and chaplain. And so I knew, okay, a woman chaplain, minister can do this, right? And so that model that I saw over 10 years ago really planted a seed to me to know that soul force, that satyagraha, that nonviolence in action could also be connected to social enterprise and being able to start a business that does good and employs marginalized populations as well. And so at night, I was teaching during the day, and at night, I went to a local craft shop and learned how to make bath bombs and learned about essential oil blends and all of these different things. I eventually got a soap making coach from the Caribbean where I was living during my Peace Corps time that helps us perfect our ingredients now, right? Okay, so we started with just that one little bath bomb there. I remember being in there's a program called Do Good X with the Forum for Theological Exploration, where they train Christian ministers and faith leaders who want to learn more about business and social enterprise. And so I was one of their first cohorts back in 2017. I had made only about 4 bath bombs at the time. They were kind of crinkling up because I hadn't perfected the recipe, so they were kind of coming apart. I had a few essential oil blends, but I put a little bow on it. And I got in front of those investors and those potential customers, and I pitched Argrow's house. I said, we are Argrow's house, made by women, survivors strong, and we need you to be our customers and our investors. And so those were our first customers moving forward. Right now we have a growing product line. We partner with other social enterprises around the world. We have a subscription box, and things are moving forward 4 years later. We also have a storefront now, which is a blessing. Okay. All right, so Christian social entrepreneurship for me is connected to business pioneering, being grounded in the love of God, Christian perspective, a social mission, impacting for the kingdom or kingdom of God. So one thing that's unique, as I've mentioned before, about social enterprise is our commitment to serving marginalized populations. All of our products are survivor made, handmade by women survivors of violence. I always say hands that were once beating black and blue are used to create something beautiful and a safe place that celebrates who they are. And so our ladies all have survived something traumatic, right? And so in that, right, they learn how to make beautiful bath and body products, but we also have to be committed to their mental health, their psychological health, their physical health. And so we partner with therapists, counselors, lawyers, attorneys. Many of them are going through custody battles for their children and other things. And so, is it difficult? Yes, it is hard work, right? Because we're committed to growing a business, which employs the ladies, but also making sure that the ladies, stay healthy on the journey, right? Sometimes addiction is a reality. Sometimes, narcotics, alcoholism, all of these things, because with trauma comes so many realities connected to trying to deal with that trauma. And that's the case not just for women survivors of violence, but also veterans, also for people who've lived impoverished lives and other things. And so, our commitment to serving marginalized populations, there's a lot of joy that comes out of it, but there's also, a reality of being committed to this, having that soul force, even in the midst of that friction, even in the solidarity relationships with the women and children that we serve. Right? It was important for us to learn about our customers so that we can provide the best possible care. And so with social enterprise, you have customers who need your products, customers who want your products because they desire to support a good cause. But it was important for us to still create the best possible products. So that made that reality, we had to make sure we had great mentorship, had a good team to help us move things forward. Okay, so over time, we've had to rebrand and other things. If you look here, that's my grandma Argrow on the left, our before. And so, grandma is so sweet, sweet as pie. And she's the reason, this company is named after her. She's the reason I believe in God, the reason I believe in love. But because we used her image, it kind of aged our branding a bit, right? And so we had to go through rebranding, which took some time. But if you look here, you have the purple that represents domestic violence awareness, the teal that represents sexual assault awareness, and the tulip that represents growth and empowerment. Okay, that was our rebrand. Now, community is key when you're starting a nonprofit organization. So social enterprise is a nonprofit, a 501c3, but it's also a for-profit entity. And so one thing that you have to do is get a board of directors and establish a board of directors. And so some of these women here were our first members of our board of directors. So you'll see a social worker here, a women's studies professor here, a banking expert, someone who specializes in higher education, a lawyer, an accountant. So it's important to have all of those people on your team and be able to recruit. When you share, what you're doing, your mission, your cause while you're doing that, and that soul force comes out in your passion for the work that you're doing. People want to join and people want to commit, even if it's temporary, to help you move forward and help your cause move forward. Right. So the unique thing about social enterprise, and this was our funding model when we first started, now things are moving forward because we've developed trust with private donors and also with granting organizations and trust. And so when we first started, almost half of the income that we were bringing in came from our actual social enterprise sales. And so every weekend, our first 2 years before COVID, we were out at women's conferences, at churches, in the community, and I know many of you with your cause, you may be, when I was organizing with Pache Bene, some people do nonviolent action on their corner every single Friday, every single Saturday, right? So this commitment to sharing your mission and your cause so that people will know what you're doing and will join the cause. And so the unique thing about social enterprise, you have your sales that help to grow your organization and help to serve the community that you're serving even more and employ the ladies. You're also able to apply for grants. Now, when you're applying for grants, oftentimes it takes building relationships and trust with those granting organizations, but it's a blessing to be able to apply for grants. And then the more you share about what you're doing, your cause, developing those relationships, the more foundations and others, you're able to develop relationships with private donors. And for us, private donors have helped us to pay off our mortgage, 2 buildings in a matter of 4 years. Social enterprise sales have helped us serve over 400 women and children and be able to employ over 22 women. And our grants really help our holistic programming moving forward. Okay. Being 2022, all of these things come into mind and to picture when you are moving forward with social enterprise. So development of digital media platforms, growing sales and marketing strategies, and scaling up product manufacturing. We just started doing that with our equipment and being able to purchase more professional grade equipment. Okay, so all of these things, and it seems like it's like a different language, connected to, social justice. So to combine social justice and social enterprise, you do have to do more. You don't have to get an MBA, but it is important that you connect with people who are experts in these fields, or even there's a SCORE in most cities around the country. They help with small business planning for free. And then also, I've done a couple short certificate programs through Venture School, through the University of Iowa. Oftentimes, business schools have short certificate programs as well, or even pitch competitions. Right. So during COVID-19, we had to pivot to move things forward. So as I said, we had to start partnering with other organizations, other women survivor artisans around the world, and we started a subscription box. So if you see here, we had a Black Lives Matter painting from an artist in DC with 2 of our products when we first started. There's a bracelet here from Tanzania for women survivors there. There's a beautiful basket there, handmade by Mary, who's a survivor here in the Davenport area. And so by doing that, we had to be creative, and it's helped us grow our business moving forward. So with us, with our social enterprise, there's always this kind of back and forth of working to understand and assist. Okay, so what do the women and children survivors of violence in our community need? Connect them with the resources. What do our customers crave for? Build it for them, right? So it's always a back and forth of balancing with the survivors and customers. Okay, so these are 4 reflection questions that came up when I was thinking about what we have learned today or what we have discussed today. And these are questions that are going to go to your small groups. So I'll just read them out loud and then I'll stop share. And then any questions that we have just for me as a group or any reflections you have, we'll have a little time to do that. So the questions are, what social issue are you most passionate about and why? What does soul force in action look like for you in relation to your cause? Some examples include or may include public witness, social enterprise, or even monthly rallies. Third question, how do you respond to conflict? And some of you already answered this question. What script do you go to? And what would it take to embrace 2 hands of nonviolence in your daily life? And last question, what is social enterprise? This is something we just talked about. And what does or what social enterprise look like in your context? Okay. All right. Okay, everyone. So those are some questions that we've talked about kind of a lot of different things in a short amount of time. So we talked about soul force, satyagraha, and that friction, right? That happens that causes us to want to do good in the world and to stand up for truth, right? We talked about 2 hands of nonviolence and what that looks like in our personal lives and the different scripts. And then we also talked about Argrow's house as an example of soul force in action through social enterprise. Okay. All right. So what questions do you have for me? And I think we have a few minutes before students go off into their small groups.
Yes, thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Kitt. I really appreciate your powerful insights and your example of tangible nonviolent action in the world. So we'll take a few minutes now. Everybody, I would encourage you to submit questions in the chat. And then in a bit, we'll take a break so that our college groups can take off for their own discussions. So yeah, in the meantime, please submit some questions. One I have to start with for you, Dr. Kitt, is can you tell us a little bit more about the link between nonviolence and healing? You've done a lot of work with healing trauma and healing. So where does nonviolence come into play with that?
Yeah. Well, okay, nonviolence and healing. Well, as I was saying, I specifically work with women and children survivors of trauma. But I know that when we are committed to working with marginalized populations in the justice work that we do, right? It's important to be sensitive, to ourselves, first of all, to extend compassion to ourselves. But I know that it's also important for us when we're working in solidarity with people to have an understanding that people oftentimes, even though it may not look like literal like war, right? It may not look like literal war, or maybe it is metaphorical war for many, even in our own country, right? For them in their social location, right? That is trauma, right? That's trauma. That's something that is hurtful, something that is damaging mind, body, and spirit, right? And so healing is a journey. Healing is something that doesn't happen just overnight, right? It's something that when we're working in solidarity with people, it's important that we are a compassionate presence with those that we're working and serving in solidarity with, even in our own communities, but also I am a believer that being able to establish safety, to be able to remember and mourn, be able to reconnect with ordinary life, it's important to either partner with service providers who are professionals in counseling, be it or spiritual directors, pastors, a trusted mentor, a social worker at your school, right? I think that having those resources for psychological care, for spiritual care, in our healing journeys, but also the people that we serve are very important, right? So when I think about nonviolence, social justice, the trauma that happens sometimes in our personal lives, but also in our communities, it's important to think about, to at least acknowledge that trauma-informed care resources are important, and to be able to either connect those that we're serving with those resources, or be able to ask those people who are the experts to come into our communities to be able to volunteer their time to assist, either with support groups, even yoga classes, right? Journaling, cooking, all of these different things are connected to what feeds our soul in the midst of our serving and even in the midst of our healing. Thank you,
Thank you
Hannah.
so much.
Yeah,
That
thank you.
strikes me as like another form of active nonviolence, or that satyagraha is that healing itself and that accessing those resources. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got several other questions here.
Okay.
The next one I'll pose to you is, how do you suggest that we begin to change our mindsets from the avoidance, accommodation, and counterviolence towards reaching out with the two hands? So how do we move from those three unhelpful things towards the reaching out with two hands you were talking about?
Yeah, yeah. We have a whole, I wish we all could be in a big gymnasium right now and go through a training, because we have an actual exercise that helps with this, right? And there's an exercise where it's called parallel lines. And after we teach, actually we teach two hands in the midst of the parallel lines, but usually we put someone who has a certain view, right? So maybe me, I believe that I'll just give a basic example, though very important, right? I believe that there should be a stop sign right here because I have children and I do not want any cars to impact my children's safety. So we need to petition to make sure a stop sign is here, right? But my neighbor is right here and he's like, okay, so no, that stop sign is going to mess up my view. No, that stop sign does not need to go there, right? So we're in opposition with each other, right? So in the midst of the parallel lines, we work to put into practice, right, two hands of nonviolence, which can be challenging when someone is screaming at you, right? Literally in your household or in the community. And so much of what we do is connected to centering, being mindful of our thoughts, being mindful of taking a deep breath and understanding, right? And also using I statements in regards to how we sometimes disarm others. I think sometimes, that conflict is there because of not understanding each other, because of seeing other people as the other. Oh, they believe this, they believe that, so I'm going to, push, or I'm going to avoid. But oftentimes, we're able to, disarming can happen when you take a deep breath and acknowledge the other person as a human being, right? And listen to them and know that, sometimes it is personal, sometimes it's not personal. Sometimes you do have to agree to disagree, right? But I would recommend Exploring Nonviolent Living by Pache Bene, which is a very helpful book with 12 lessons to really work through these type of issues. It's on pachebene.org's website, and it's such a helpful 12 lesson curriculum that you can share in your community and work through these issues. But I would also, I think being mindful is the first step. The fact that you could acknowledge the script that you embrace is a big deal, right? Most people just aren't aware. You kind of move forward in life without even being mindful of how you respond to people, or that's the way that you respond. So I think being mindful is the first step, and then being able to take a deep breath, assess why you may feel that way, and work to change the behavior. But it's a journey as well. But I think mindfulness is the first step forward. Yeah. I think there were a couple others, and then I know it's time to move forward. I want to be respectful of time, David. So, and Hannah.
Yes, thank you. We are already at 8 o'clock and we have some other great questions. So right now we'll just take a 90-second break so that our groups, college groups, if you'd like, you can log off to have your own discussions, and then we'll come right back and have a few more questions here with Dr. Kitts.
Okay, good luck, students. Thanks so much for joining. I'm so proud of you.
Okay, thank you everyone for letting us take a little break here so our groups could log off. We have a few more minutes here with Dr. Kitt, and I've got several questions for you. So feel free to keep submitting those in the chat if you have more questions. But I thought we would start here with a question from Lauren. She says, from your experience and work, what do you see as nonviolent action or solidarity that would address the root causes of violence against women or sexual violence?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, good question. I think that, we're specifically talking violence against women, but I think regardless of what cause we have, it's important to, ask that same question, or what cause we're most passionate about. I think it's important to ask that question connected to the root causes. I think oftentimes when um, people who abuse others, right? I guess two things I'm thinking, right? Oftentimes the oppressed becomes the oppressor, right? Oftentimes people who are abused may become the abuser. People who feel powerless, try to embrace power in a way sometimes that oppresses others. The oppressed becomes the oppressor. And so that's the case oftentimes for the families that I see where abuse has been a reality. I think also I find that sometimes women who are in our community, they may be a survivor of sex trafficking. They also may be a survivor of domestic violence. They may come out of that relationship and then may become a survivor of, domestic violence again. And so, there's this vulnerability that may be there connected to their insecurity, connected to maybe childhood trauma, maybe connected to certain things that an abuser, someone who wants power, sees. And so they kind of prey on the vulnerable woman that we're serving. So sometimes that happens. Sometimes, many of our ladies are college educated, right? Very bright. All of our ladies are bright, regardless of if they have a degree or not. But sometimes abuse still happens even in the midst of there being a very confident woman. But I do find that more times than not, right, if we don't to create safe spaces and resources for the woman, the survivor, to reflect and understand in therapy, to really figure out with a trained professional the root cause of their addiction, and have a long-term plan with someone to assist them in that way, then that cycle will continue, connected to abuse and getting in an unhealthy relationship, and also narcotics and alcohol and other things. And so again, right, I am a believer that the spiritual care that's provided, the psychological care that's provided, the support groups, the holistic programming that supports a woman, a survivor, mind, body, and spirit is so important. And, oftentimes the services are there, but people don't have access because they're so expensive. For me in my journey, I was working for the government. And so, I was blessed to have the best possible care and victim advocates and therapists and, even like FBI protection, all these different things. Most women don't have that experience. And so, we work to provide safe spaces and the best possible care for free for the women that we serve. And so, the root cause oftentimes is much deeper than, what's happening in that moment. Oftentimes there's something that is deeper connected to a trauma that happened before this trauma that needs to be, that needs to have a safe space to be worked through to move forward with. And for us, right, there needs to be trained professionals and assistants to be able to help the women journey through that for the long haul. Yeah. Okay. What support do we
Thank
give
you.
the babies? Yeah, I'm looking at the questions. And also, let's talk, we're talking about the women that we serve, but also, any comments you all have about or questions about, and if you want to share your experiences connected to Satyagraha, Soul Force, the work that you all do, social enterprise, even the two hands of nonviolence, anything that came up for you, right, in your work, because I know every person on this call, if you are present and if you are here, it means that you're passionate about this issue and that something nonviolence is important to you, and that soul force has been sparked, that fire has been sparked inside your heart, inside your soul, to be able to move forward in what you're most passionate about as it relates to injustice and justice and solidarity. And so I want to hear from you as well. But okay, so our children, what do we do to support the kids, our babies? We do all different types of therapies now. One of the things that our moms were asking for was more support for our children, for their children. And so we have all different types of therapy where the moms and babies can come. We ride horses for therapy. We do art therapy. And then our kids, we have a large community center now. So during support groups, they will run laps around the center. And so I said, okay, we have to get something else going here. So we just got, we have a ping pong table now and a basketball goal and all these other things. But, trauma-informed care for children is so important, because if we don't address that, the cycle of violence will continue in their lives when they're adults. And so we take that very seriously, and we have all different types of unique, creative and active, types of healing resources for them, which is a blessing.
And I would also just jump in and invite people to, Dr. Kit has a great website, and Argrow's house also has a website, so I invite you to look up those. And can I pose, I found I have got like 3 different people asking the same question, Dr. Kit, if I could pose this next one to you.
Yeah.
How do you keep that soul fire burning when you also talked about like commitment and like being in it for the long haul? You've been doing Argrow's house for 5 years now. How do you keep that going?
Yeah. So, I know many of you all have been doing your work, and I want to definitely, I think it was Noel that talked about organizing a bus. I want to definitely read that after we reflect on that and have, I think it was Noel or Bob, Noel that's sharing. I would love for you to share. But that's one thing that often came up. So when I was organizing for Pace Bene, I would call an activist, say in Idaho or, even Florida or Omaha. And them and a small group of people may have been protesting for years. I mean, some people have protested weekly, faithfully for half of their lives in their city, right? And regardless if someone shows up or not, they are committed to being the change in their community, and they show up, right? And thank you Thank you all, each one of you, for the good work you do, because regardless if no one shows up or not, right? Someone sees you. The work is important, even if they don't say anything or say anything. I'm telling you, what you do, the nonviolence, the satyagraha work you do is so important. But how do you keep that fire sparked? How do you keep things going, right? I mean, just keeping it real, this work is hard, right? When you commit your life to nonviolence, when you commit your life to being the change, right? It's a responsibility, right? And it's not always it doesn't always feel like a lightweight. Sometimes it feels like a heavyweight, right? But what I've learned is that we don't have to carry that heavyweight alone, right? We have a whole community of people, not just in our communities, but around the country that are there to be able, even though we may feel alone sometimes, right? But we don't have to do it alone, right? David is here. No pressure, David. David is here. Hi, David. Hannah's here. No pressure, Hannah. And Pachabene's here. We have a whole community, called Campaign Nonviolence. Ryan is there always. People want to be, and he always works to connect people in community. We need each other, right? We need each other in this work, and we don't have to do it alone. One thing that Veronica, my dear Veronica, who recently passed away, she taught me was before we did anything, she always did a meditation, or sometimes she had beautiful sound healing bowl. She had all of these spiritual care resources, right? And so, self-care is also so important in this work, right? We give, but you also have to care for yourself. So you have to figure out what works for you, what replenishes your body, your mind, your spirit, your soul, so that you can continue to be in solidarity in the work that you do. Otherwise, it's not sustainable and it's not healthy for you. So I would say being in a community of support, be it virtual or in person, right, on the journey. And I would also emphasize self-care. Right. Thank you for the question. Noel, you want to tell us about what you're up to in Bristol, Tennessee?
Yes, Reverend Barber from North Carolina has started the Poor People's Campaign, and talking about somebody who's been at it every week. He has Moral Mondays where he goes to the Capitol, and he is carrying on the work of Martin Luther King for equality, voting rights, living wage. Everything, and it's for poor people. 43% of the people in this country are low wage or in poverty. 53% of the children in this country are in poverty. So he is organizing a march on Washington, June 18th. And I think so far there are about 360 buses that have been organized to come from around the country. And so we are in Northeast Tennessee. This is a very red area, but we are getting a bus together to go up and be a part of that. So they're coming from everywhere. I know they're coming from Iowa, they're coming from Wisconsin, they're coming from, so you just have to Google Poor People's Campaign and William Barber, June 18th. So that's coming up.
Yeah,
so
thank you. Well, would you put that link in the chat so people can click on it and see that as a resource? Yeah, Moral Mondays and the Poor People's Campaign, such good work for so many years. And so it's awesome to see the work continuing, and thank you, Noel, for your commitment to being the change within the Poor People's Campaign community. Thank you for sharing. Okay.
Another example of what you were saying, Dr. Kitt, of like leaning on community and others to keep that fire burning. Yeah. And we are just about out of time here. I'm sorry, I know we have more questions we wanted to ask Dr. Kitt.
Can we just, there's one more comment from Franciscan Peacemakers. I just wanted to read their work. Franciscan Peacemakers provides a pathway to sustainable, healthy, safe, and productive lives for women engaging in prostitution due to trauma, human sex trafficking, and drug addiction in Milwaukee. They do some similar work. Okay, yes, I know Franciscan Peacemakers well. So, yep, thank you so much. And they are a sister organization to Thistle Farm. So thank you so much for sharing. Okay. All right. So Hannah, thank you so much. And what were
Yeah,
you?
thanks. Do you have any final last thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I would just say, I would just say I'm so proud of you all for being on the call. I am so proud of the good work that you do and you are committed to. I would say that, remember that even when the work gets tough, that soul force is still there, that those two rocks are still able to hit and that fire for this work is able to continue to burn, that the work is important, right? And that your community needs you in solidarity with them. And yeah, I would say that Pace Bene has lots of resources, online for training. John Deere, who was the first speaker, who's a colleague, has written several books, about peacemaking and soul force and nonviolence. And so, lots of good resources that have been spoken about over the last few weeks. So yeah, you can check out Argos House more at argoshouse.org and learn more about social enterprise that way, or you can email me at drkitford@gmail.com. So thank you again for your time and for caring about this type of work. God bless you all, and I thank God for you.
Thank you so much again. And just also a final reminder to everybody to join us next week. Tuesday at 7, Christina Leaño is going to be doing a talk on nonviolence and Laudato Si. So we hope to see you again next week as well. Thanks so much again, Dr. Kit, and we will see everyone next week.